Journey IFC strives to create safe spaces to worship God. Know that you are welcome just as you are, regardless of religious background or lack thereof, skin color, political affiliation, sexuality, age, culture, or any other label you own or society throws on you. You are welcomed and celebrated here just as you are.
I'm Nathalie.
Hi, Nathalie.
So glad to be here. This really is my chosen family. Also have a few other chosen families, but God bless everybody outside and bless all of our families from birth. But bless all of the other people who have welcomed us and continue, and may we be chosen family. Our story is about a chosen family who came together under very difficult circumstances, but through a lot of love. In the days when the judges ruled, it's from Ruth 1-18. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to live in the mid-country of Moab, he and his wife and 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife, Naomi. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the other Ruth. When they had lived there about 10 years, both sons also died. So the woman was left without her sons and her husband. Then she started to return with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab, for she had heard that God had considered God's people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she had been living, she and her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on their way to go back to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's house. May God deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. May God grant that you find security, each of you, in the home of your husband." And she kissed them, and they wept aloud. And they said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb, that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. And even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I should have a husband tonight and bear sons, would you then wait until they were grown? Would you then refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, it has been far more bitter for me than for you, because the hand of God has turned against me." And then they wept aloud again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. So she said, "Look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you, to turn back from following you. For where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May God do thus to me and more as well, even if even death parts me from you." And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more.
Sometimes the Bible has some great stories. I'm just saying, that's a really good one. That's a juicy one right there. I was going to say this morning, I put on the TV for my dog, as one does, and Mr. Rogers was on, and it made me think of Journey and Journey's history of using Mr. Rogers and Fred groups, and all of that. But he was talking about how he had these big emotions and he put it into art and made this big mess, and he thought it looked terrible, and someone was like, that's beautiful. And I was like, that's kind of like Journey, a place where we can be a big old mess, and other people are like, that's beautiful. I'm like, keep doing it. So I'm happy to be here in the mess with y'all, and I hope y'all had a wonderful Thanksgiving week. I know we had several people that were sick, that were out of town, so it wasn't that great of a week for some people, but I'm glad to be here with you. I know that I had a full week where I went and spent some time with my siblings and all 8 nieces and nephews that are all under 10. It's like 10, 9, 8, 7, basically down to 1 of the ages. And talk about the loud holiday. And then we traveled to Bernie to see Skylar's family, and we enjoyed sitting around a fire and eating a lot of really good food. It was a little quieter there, which was nice. And I have to say, after this week, my love tank is pretty full. Now, being here with some of my chosen family, you all here, I'm feeling the love yet again, and I hope you all feel this love as well. I'm thankful not only for my family, but also for my in-laws and for my Journey family, all of you here today, and people who aren't here today as well. Our scripture reading this morning, like I said, is a really good one, and it comes from the book of Ruth. And in this story, we hear about a family system consisting of a man named Elimelech and his wife Naomi and their 2 sons. And at this point in history, it says that the judges were ruling Israel. And so this period saw a lot of turnover in leadership. And the judges, they were military leaders, not like judges we think of it now, not like Woody, you know. It's more of like a military person who came up and would rise in the ranks and would start making decisions on behalf of the people of Israel, only to fail in some huge way or another, and for another judge to eventually take on their place. So at this time, there was no centralized government, and as the book of Judges tells us, everyone did what was pleasing in their own sight. As we can imagine, this would probably lead to a pretty turbulent existence for anyone living in that region. With constant leadership changes and no one enforcing or regulating laws, it's no wonder that there was a famine in the land at this time. No one was ensuring that resources were being stored properly to protect the Israelites from widespread hunger. And this lack of leadership led many Israelites to search for a new life in other regions, where they would have enough food to sustain them and their families. Elimelech was one of these people forced into migration due to hunger, and with him came his family. And it's interesting to note that this family came from a town in the southern kingdom of Judah called Bethlehem, which means the house of bread or the house of food. So the famine was so bad that people were being forced to leave the bread house because there was no bread or food there. The irony should not go unnoticed. So Elimelech makes this dangerous decision to move his family during this time of famine to a foreign region. And what region does he choose? Well, the warring nation of Moab, home of the Moabites, Israel's number 1 enemy at that time. It does not seem to make sense why this Israelite family chose to go to Moab, but it may give us some insight into how bad the famine had really become, and how desperate Elimelech and his family were for food. So desperate that they would risk their lives in this foreign and presumably dangerous region for them to live in. And unfortunately, the story gets even more dangerous. After arriving in this foreign place, now as foreigners themselves, this family is shaken up yet again. Elimelech, the father, dies, leaving Naomi alone with her 2 sons, far from home, in the midst of a famine, surrounded by people that were once considered enemies. Naomi, now a single mother, raised her sons in this kind of harsh environment. But the sons grew and seemed to become naturalized to the region, probably adopting their accent and their customs and their practices. And the sons go as far as marrying into this warring nation of Moabites. Both sons marry Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. And things seem to be turning around for this family, because maybe it's not so bad after all, right? Well, not exactly. After 10 years living in that land, another tragedy strikes the family when the 2 sons also die, leaving behind Naomi with her 2 daughter-in-laws, Orpah and Ruth. These 3 women are now heartbroken, deep in grief, unsure of what would happen next, and stranded alone in a world that was not too friendly to women, especially women like Naomi, who were older and widowed and foreign. So when Naomi gets word that Bethlehem, the house of bread, finally has food, she decides to return home with her daughter-in-laws in tow. Judah bound, Naomi catches herself and looks at her two beloved daughters, two women who were of no blood relation at all and who had no special social obligation to stay, but who were still traveling with her. And Naomi says to them, "Please go back to your mother's houses, and may God treat you as well as you treated my deceased sons and as you have treated me." Naomi tells them to go find husbands so that they would not have to live a life much like hers, widowed and alone with nowhere to go. Because at this time, women were just seen as property, and they were sold off at a young age to a family that could afford them, to marry their son in some way, often older sons. And once married, they were no longer the property of their fathers, but of their husbands. And so if their husband died, then their sons would take over the leadership role in the family. And this is how their patriarchal system works. So now that their husbands and Naomi's sons have died, where are they to go? Could they go home? Maybe, maybe not. Could they find another husband? Well, it was harder for a widower at that time, especially for Naomi, who was older. Could they leave behind this family they had grown so close to over the years? Well, that seemed to be just as difficult to do for these three women. Naomi believes that she is a burden to these two daughter-in-laws, and she does not want to drag them down with her. And so Naomi knows the culture around her and knows herself well enough to know what's going to happen. Without anywhere to go or any man to marry, Naomi believes that she would most likely end up begging for scraps of food on the streets. And she did not want that life for these daughters of her. So she tells Orpah and Ruth to go home. And where does Naomi want to go? Well, of course she wants to go home as well. Naomi is taking yet again another risk. This story is full of risk because she sets out into this foreign region as a foreigner herself, even though she's been there 10 years, to return to a place that 10 years ago was her home, a place that may not welcome this estranged, widowed woman back in as easily as before. So Naomi, knowing what was ahead, pleads with her daughters, saying, "Please go back. Go back to the house of your mothers, since I cannot give you any sons to marry or get married myself." Knowing the perilous journey ahead of her and the lack of a guaranteed future, Naomi tells Orpah and Ruth to return not to their fathers, but to their mothers. And it's interesting to note that Naomi uses the phrase, "your mother's house." Usually women would be told to return to their fathers, but Naomi tells them to go home to mom. Maybe this is more insight into the family dynamics that both Orpah and Ruth left. Maybe their fathers died, we don't know. Maybe they are estranged. Maybe the mother runs the house. We have no idea, though. And at this heartbreaking moment in our story, these three women, believing that God had turned against them and fearing the split that was about to happen, embrace one another and cry together not once, but twice. A sign of the intimacy and relationships that were built during this time in Moab. Orpah lovingly took Naomi's advice, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. She returns home to her Moabite people, to the Moabite ways of life with her family of origin. But Ruth couldn't leave her mother-in-law to fend for herself. Ruth loved her too much. And so Ruth told Naomi she was going to come with her by sharing what is called Ruth's Song. It's a very popular thing. It's even used in weddings. We hear it often. Ruth says, "Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. When you die, I want to be buried right next to you." Talk about a bold declaration of love right there. What Ruth and Naomi shared went way beyond just a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law dynamic. What Ruth and Naomi had was a chosen family. In a paper called A Theory of Human Motivation by Abraham Maslow, written in 1943, this American psychologist known as Maslow created a pyramid-shaped graph that explained the motivations of humans. And we can actually go to the next slide and we'll show that. As Maslow found in his research, at the base of human motivation comes the basic needs for food, water, a shelter, and sleep. All basic things that humans need to stay alive. All things that Naomi and Ruth would possibly be without on their journey through both Moab and Judah. And if we go up in the pyramid, because that's the base, if you go up the next level, The next human motivator is physical safety. Once you have the basics of food and drink, humans then need to know that they are safe, moving us from the physical and into the psychological needs of humans. And as we may guess, this need would be at risk on their journey as well. And above that is belongingness and friendship, which, is likely going to be a challenge for them because a Moabite and an Israelite traveling together in a Moabite region and an Israelite region, it's not going to be an easy transition. And then Maslow's hierarchy is peaked with the need for self-esteem and self-actualization. Two things also at risk since the remainder of the pyramid was also at risk too. Naomi and Ruth committed to this journey and life together, not knowing what it would mean, not knowing what would be put on the line for them. And so they have to put everything on the line, it seems. There was no physical safety for women traveling alone at this time. They were seen as prey for highway robbers and slave traders. And how could they both belong somewhere where either of them would be considered a foreigner or an outsider? Moab and Judah were just as foreign to either one of these women. And this relationship centered on the divide between these two nations was at risk. How could they possibly achieve the higher levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs if they cannot even ensure their basic needs first? What Ruth and Naomi are giving up is everything. Everything. But the one thing they cannot give up is each other. The story tells us that Ruth clings tightly to her mother-in-law, a once stranger and now a mother, a friend, or a life partner. And over the 10 years of their relationship together, Naomi and Ruth endured a famine, a war, forced migration, and the death of their beloved ones. What they are left with is this person who helped them get through all of that pain and suffering. Another aspect of the book of Ruth that is fascinating is that God is not a central character in the storyline at all. In fact, God is only present through people referring to God throughout this book. But God does not seem to be an active participant, at least on the surface. But for Naomi, she was blessed with something, someone who would not leave her to die alone. And I think that's where God shows up in this story, is by providing Naomi with a chosen family, by providing Ruth. Ruth, the foreigner from Moab, of all places, right, because that's the warring nation, is the only one showing this older, widowed Israelite that she will not be alone, that she belongs somewhere. And in this relationship, one of Maslow's needs are met, belongingness and love. Maybe not the belongingness they hoped for or the love they expected, but their needs were fulfilled in one another. And so they cling to each other as a chosen family. Throughout history, and honestly up to this day, there's been this emphasis on a particular model of what family should look like. And this model looked like a man and a woman and 2.5 kids, I think is what they say. And it's become the bedrock of our society in many ways. But what happens when our families look a little different? How does society react when we get our needs met in ways beyond what is socially acceptable? Well, typically, diverting from this traditional path can bring us into a place of risk. Like Naomi and Ruth deciding to build a life together with no idea what was going to happen next. A life built upon unknowns, but a life founded in a deep love and respect for one another. And that is what chosen family can look like. A place where our needs can be met beyond our blood relations or social obligations. A people who will not leave us in the most dire moments of life, but a people who will walk with us faithfully through them. The model that Naomi and Ruth create disrupts all patterns as we know them up to this point prior in the story and in the reading from the scriptures. And if we go back to last week and talk about the family systems work that we were discussing, and we see this new family system here, it's been created by these two women who want to have new roles and new rules. And from this family comes a wonderful history. Ruth, with the help of her mother-in-law, finds another husband. Unfortunately, it's still a patriarchal system. And they eventually have kids, and she eventually becomes the great-grandmother of the king of Israel, King David. This foreign Moabite woman, the ancestor of an Israelite king. And the tradition doesn't even stop there. The Gospel of Matthew says that there's a genealogy or family tree of Jesus, and guess who is included in that list? Well, none other than Ruth herself, the ancestor of Jesus Christ, one of only 5 women listed by name in this genealogy. A woman who could have easily walked away from Naomi, but who insisted on staying. The decision Ruth made to stay with her chosen family, to stay with Naomi, changed the family system forever. So, Journey, who would we be willing to change the system forever with? Who are those chosen people in our lives that we would risk it all for? And who would help us fulfill our needs? May we be blessed with a chosen family like that of Naomi and Ruth as we navigate this life together. May it be so. Amen.
Amen.
Well, in keeping with tradition, but as part of the blessing, I want to tell you the strangest tradition in my family. About 35 years ago, my father, who always got just the worst Christmas gifts, gave my sister a fruitcake. And every year it gets regifted at family gatherings and everything, to the point that we follow each other to our cars to make sure that it doesn't get slipped in. And one year, Andrew, we had it, and we went to my mother's, and he snuck into the apartment complex early to the gated community and let it down on a string onto her patio. So every time she'd follow me out to the car, he got it off the patio and left it for her. So as being part of the blessing is one of the sports that in our family that we may never really experience is a cakewalk. Right? It just isn't. But the good thing is ultimately we always get to eat cake. So this holiday season, be blessed with the cake that we get to eat. Go in peace and enjoy your week. Amen.
Help decorate. Yes, help decorate for Christmas, please.
Now you know.
And help us pull down. That's all still in the attic. And give the Zoomers.
Thanks, Omar.